The room is silent, yet it screams, "You have seen this person before." They walk into a crowded space, and without uttering a single word, the atmosphere shifts. Heads turn, not because of a loud voice or a flashy display, but because of a perceived weight, a gravity. In the cold, calculating eyes of the social predator, this is not vibes or energy. It is the successful deployment of a psychological price tag. You are witnessing the ultimate Machiavellian deception, the art of acting expensive when you are, in reality, a commoner in the wings. Most people believe that to be seen as valuable, they must be useful. They offer their time freely. They explain themselves to anyone who asks, and they smile to ease the tension of others. They are cheap, in the most brutal sense of the word, easily acquired, easily discarded, and infinitely replaceable. But the architect of power knows a darker truth. Value is not a reflection of your bank account. It is a reflection of the barrier to entry you create around your soul.
Do you hear me?
In the theater of the world, people do not pay for the substance of the play. They pay for the prestige of the seat. This is where the majority of the ambitious fail. They play the game of more. More effort, more talking, more visibility. They believe that by being everywhere, they become essential. In reality, they become background noise. To act expensive is to understand the law of scarcity at a cellular level. It is the realization that the sun is only appreciated because it sets, and that the rarest diamonds are kept under triple-tempered glass, not because they are inherently stronger than coal, but because they are harder to touch. But this is where most people make a fatal mistake.
You are a traitor.
They confuse expensive with arrogant. Arrogance is a loud, defensive posture. It is the mask of the insecure. True expensive behavior is quiet, composed, and terrifyingly indifferent. It is the aura of a man who has already decided his own worth and finds the world's opinion of it to be a quaint, distant curiosity. Take, for instance, the case of the Chevalier d'Eon, or the legendary Count of Saint-Germain. Saint-Germain appeared in the courts of 18th century Europe, claiming to be centuries old, a master of alchemy who possessed the elixir of life. He did not beg for entry into the circles of Louis XV. He simply acted as if he had seen empires rise and fall, and that the petty dramas of the French court were beneath his notice. He ate nothing at grand banquets, choosing instead to sip water and provide cryptic, brilliant insights. By refusing to participate in the common appetites of the men around him, he signaled that his price was beyond their reach. He became the most expensive man in Europe without ever showing a single coin. He understood that power is not granted. It is assumed. When you act expensive, you are performing a psychological heist. You are stealing the respect of others before you have earned it through merit. This is essential because, in the ruthless hierarchy of human nature, merit is a slow climber, while perception is a lightning strike. If you wait for the world to notice your talent, you will die in the waiting room. If you project a status that demands recognition, the world will invent reasons to justify why you belong at the top. This brings us to the concept of the social tax. Every time you over-explain your actions, every time you laugh at a joke that isn't funny to please a superior, and every time you respond to a message within seconds, you are paying a tax on your own value. You are signaling that your time is worth less than the person you are interacting with. The expensive individual, however, is a high-interest investment. They are slow to respond, not out of pettiness, but because their world is occupied by matters of greater significance. They do not seek to fill the silence in a conversation. They let the silence sit like a heavy mist, until the other person, uncomfortable and desperate for validation, begins to reveal their own weaknesses. What happens next is even more dangerous for those who do not understand the game. Once you have established a high perceived value, people will naturally begin to seek your approval. It is a biological imperative to align oneself with high-status individuals. They will offer you information, opportunities, and loyalty, all in the hopes of receiving a crumb of your recognition. You have become the expensive asset that they want to add to their portfolio. But the moment you show that you need their validation, the illusion shatters. The price tag falls off. Consider the strategic movements of Cardinal de Richelieu, the Red Eminence of France. Richelieu was not the king, but he was the power behind the throne. He navigated a court filled with enemies by maintaining a chilling level of composure and an aura of untouchable intellect. He never lowered himself to the petty squabbles of the nobles. He acted as the ultimate arbiter of fate. Even when his health was failing, he traveled in a massive, velvet-lined litter, carried by 20 men, literally looking down on the people as he passed. He understood that to be perceived as the most powerful man in the room, one must physically and psychologically occupy a space that others are afraid to enter. And this is where the real manipulation begins. When you act expensive, you force others to play a game of catch-up. They assume you know something they don't. They assume your confidence is backed by massive reserves of wealth, influence, or secret knowledge. And this creates a vacuum of information that their own insecurities fill. You don't have to lie about your success. You simply have to refuse to admit to your struggles. The world treats the man who carries himself like a prince, even in rags, with a cautious respect. It never affords the wealthy man who carries himself like a servant. But there is a dark irony at the heart of this strategy. While you are manipulating the perceptions of others, you are also fundamentally altering your own psychology. To act expensive is to practice a form of self-hypnosis. By refusing to accept less than you believe you are worth, you eventually become a person who cannot accept less. You begin to make decisions based on this new identity. You stop associating with cheap people who drain your energy. You stop taking cheap shortcuts in your work. And the mask, if worn long enough, becomes the face. However, maintaining this facade requires a ruthless level of self-discipline. One slip, one moment of being too relatable, one outburst of uncontrolled emotion, and the spell is broken. The expensive aura is a fragile glass structure. It is beautiful and commanding, but it cannot survive a direct hit from the truth of desperation. This is why the Machiavellian must master the art of the limited reveal. You must show enough of yourself to be intriguing, but never enough to be known. To be known is to be quantified. To be quantified is to be priced. And once you have a fixed price, you can be bought and sold.
You have lost.
As we look deeper into the shadows of this dynamic, we find that the most expensive people are those who are willing to walk away from any table. And this is the ultimate expensive move. In any negotiation, whether it's for a multi-million-dollar contract or a social interaction, the person with the most power is the one who needs the deal the least. When you act as if you are already full, you signal that the other person's offering is a luxury, not a necessity. This creates a frantic desire in them to prove their worth to you. But this is only the foundation. We have discussed the signaling, the historical precedents of the Red Eminence and the alchemist, and the psychological tax of availability.
You hear me?
But what happens when you are forced to interact with those who truly do have more power than you? How do you maintain the expensive illusion when you are in the presence of a true king? And this is where the strategy shifts from passive signaling to active psychological warfare. And this is where the real danger begins. Most people think they can just fake it till they make it. But they forget that the elites are trained to spot a counterfeit from a mile away. If your expensive act is just a suit and a stolen watch, you are a target, not a player. True Machiavellian status comes from a coldness that cannot be bought at a boutique. It comes from the realization that you are the only person in the world who can grant yourself permission to lead. The journey from being disposable to being invaluable starts with a single, brutal decision: to stop being so damn affordable. It starts with the silence you keep, the invitations you decline, and the unwavering gaze that says you have seen the end of the world and were bored by it. But as we move forward, we must ask, what is the cost of this transformation? For when you raise your price, you also limit your market. You become a luxury good that few can afford, and even fewer can understand. You will find yourself in a rarefied air that is both intoxicating and incredibly lonely. Are you prepared for the isolation that comes with an invisible throne? Because once you start acting expensive, you can never go back to being cheap without revealing that the entire thing was a lie. The trap is set. The world is waiting to see how much you will charge for your presence. And as we transition into the mechanics of the Grand Refusal, remember this: the world does not give you what you deserve. It gives you what you have the audacity to demand. We enter the realm of the ruthless economy of respect, where every interaction is a transaction, and every silence is a strategic withdrawal of currency. Most people operate in a deficit of dignity. They spend their respect like water, hoping that by flooding others with kindness, they will receive a drop of recognition in return. They are the beggars of the social world. The Machiavellian, however, operates as a central bank. They control the supply. They understand that for respect to be expensive, it must be backed by a gold standard of selective indifference. This begins with a concept that terrifies the average man: the power of the unspoken. In the modern age, we are taught to be heard, to speak our truth, and to fill every digital and physical space with our presence. This is the hallmark of the cheap individual. The world knows exactly what they think, what they want, and what they fear. They are an open book with no plot twists. But the practitioner of power knows that information is the only true currency, and once you spend it, it's gone. To act expensive is to practice a form of stealth wealth of the mind. You project an aura of having vast reserves of knowledge and influence, but you never reveal the ledger. But here is where most people make a fatal mistake. They think that by being quiet, they are being expensive. Silence without intent is just empty air. To act expensive, your silence must be pregnant with implication. It must suggest that you are choosing not to speak because the words required to educate the person in front of you are too valuable to give away for free. Or this is the consultant's paradox. People value advice they pay thousands for, yet ignore the same advice given by a friend over coffee. By withholding your insights, you force others to work for them. You create a psychological buy-in. And this is where the real manipulation begins. When you create this barrier, you trigger a deep-seated human instinct, the pursuit of the high-value target. People are biologically wired to believe that anything difficult to obtain must be superior. If you are easy to talk to, easy to convince, and easy to find, you are, by definition, low value. But the moment you become a grand refusal, the moment you say no, to an invitation without a detailed excuse. You become a mystery to be solved. Dramatic irony plays its most vicious hand here. The nice guy believes that by being helpful, he is building a bridge. In reality, he is building a doormat. He thinks he is in control of his relationships through his kindness, but he is actually being manipulated by everyone around him who knows his price is zero. Meanwhile, the expensive individual, who seems cold and detached, is actually the one being courted. People will bend their own moral codes and sacrifice their own time just to earn a single "well done" from a man who rarely speaks. This leads us to the psychology of the Grand Refusal. In the Machiavellian playbook, your no is more powerful than your yes. A yes is a commitment. It is work. It is an expenditure of your energy. A no is a preservation of your status. It signals that your time is occupied by something of higher importance, even if that something is simply the enjoyment of your own company. When you refuse an offer, you aren't just rejecting an event. You are asserting that your presence is a premium asset. But what happens next is even more dangerous. As you elevate your perceived value, you will encounter the status test. Others, sensing your ascent, will attempt to price check you. They will try to pull you into petty drama, ask you for small favors, or make subtle jokes at your expense to see if you will react. They are looking for the cheap version of you to resurface. The reactive peasant within you will want to defend your honor. The expensive prince, however, knows that to defend yourself is to admit that the attack had merit. Instead, you use the indifferent mirror. You look at the attacker with a faint, amused curiosity, as if a child had just tried to explain the world to you, and then you move on to the next topic. You do not grant them the payment of your anger. We must also examine the emotional economy of the elite. The most expensive thing you own is your emotional state. Low-value individuals are volatile assets. Their mood is dictated by the weather, the news, and the opinions of strangers. They are cheap because they can be bought with a single insult or a minor setback. To act expensive is to be emotionally illiquid. You are the calm in the center of the storm. This is not about being a robot. It is about being a fortress. This is where the counterfeit reality takes hold. Most people believe they are being authentic by sharing their struggles. This is a fatal flaw. In the ruthless economy of power, where your struggles are just vulnerabilities that have been discounted, the expensive individual never complains. To complain is to admit that you are being affected by things beyond your control. It is a confession of weakness. Instead, the practitioner of this art treats every obstacle as a temporary inconvenience beneath their status. As we go deeper, we see that acting expensive requires a mastery of visual and temporal dominance. You do not rush. Rushing is for those who are late to someone else's schedule. To act expensive is to move with a deliberate, slow pace that forces the world to wait for you. It is the realization that the king never runs. If the king is running, the kingdom has already fallen. Your movements, your speech, and even your gaze should suggest that you have all the time in the world, because your world is the only one that matters. And this is where the real manipulation begins to bear fruit. Once you have established this baseline of high value, you can begin to use strategic generosity. Because your attention is so expensive, even the smallest gesture, a short message, a brief nod, a minute of your time, becomes a massive reward. You have successfully inverted the social market. Instead of you working for their approval, they are now performing for yours. They have become the cheap ones, desperate to be bought by the expensive individual. But we must ask ourselves, what happens when the mask begins to itch? What happens when the reality of your life, the cheap parts, the struggle, the lack of resources, clashes with the expensive aura you have projected? This is the moment of the great pivot. It is the point where acting expensive must transition into possessing power, or the entire structure will collapse like a house of cards. What happens next is even more dangerous than the deception itself. To maintain the illusion, you must eventually find the real wealth, the actual leverage, the true influence that backs the currency you've been printing. You have built the brand. Now you must manufacture the product. If you fail to do so, you will be exposed as a fraud. And in the world of power, there is no greater sin than being a cheap imitation. And here is the dark, final truth that most people are too afraid to hear. The higher you ascend, the more you will be hated by the cheap. They will call you cold, they will call you fake, and they will call you ruthless. When they do this, because your presence is a constant painful reminder of their own low value. They are on sale every day, and they hate you for being out of stock. The ascension is now complete. You have moved from the architecture of perception to the economy of respect, and finally to the prince's mastery. You are no longer acting. The stillness in your soul is real. The indifference to the petty dramas of the world is genuine. The price you have set for your life is non-negotiable. But as the screen fades to black and you step back into the real world, remember this: the mask is now your face. You can never go back to being the man who needed to be liked. You can never go back to being affordable. You are now a luxury that the world must earn. The question is no longer whether you are expensive. The question is, who is powerful enough to even stand in your shadow? The world is a theater. The seats are filling up. The lights are dimming. You know your lines. You know your value. Now, walk out there and make them pay the price.